فَكُلٌّ مُيَسَّرٌ لِمَا خُلِقَ لَهُ. So every person is designed, has been made, facilitated for that which he was created. If you seek your purpose, then you will live your life to the fullest. But until a person doesn't reflect or doesn't know themselves, they know nothing. As Imam Sadiq said, "Jahilun bi nafsi, jahilun bi kulli shay." What is the key of your existence? This is the question we all have to ask ourselves. Is the key to your own existence? If you don't have that key, it's like you're living on the surface. You're living a superficial life. I was only sent, right? Innama, only sent to complete the makarim al-akhlaq, the highest level of morality. Not just any akhlaq, not fada'il, makarim. Makarim is like a special type of akhlaq. It is the highest level of akhlaq. I mean, Islam and religion is one of the manifestations of God. It is not the only manifestation. Allah came with different, hundreds of thousands of messengers, each manifested the divinity in their own time and place. If a person has nothing to do with Deen or Islam, they can have a relationship with God. And maybe Allah created them for a specific thing that you and I don't realize. We'll find that these ideas of nationhood, of madhab, of tashayyu' and tasannun, all of these things are limiting. And they are very problematic when you look at it from because the hakim, the wise person, looks beyond all of this. Every human being has conflict. From the day they're born until the day they die, there's conflict. There's a conflict on the day they're born. The child is crying when it comes out of the womb. It's not happy. It was happy in the womb. It was comfortable. Now it's into the world. The mother's in pain and the child is crying. That's all conflict. It's the whole scene is conflict. The child comes into this world in conflict and it dies in conflict. How? Because he doesn't want to leave this world, but the angel comes and he snatches the soul. So there's this conflict between staying in this world and wanting to and leaving. Because you will never become a good fighter until you learn to take a punch. You get hit in the face and you understand how to deal with that. You have to get hit. Because when you actually get hit in a real situation, then you'll know, you'll keep your balance. But it is a process of arriving at a unification. It is arriving at the knowledge and the gnosis of the oneness of being, the oneness of God's existence. To move from a state of multiplicity into a state of unity and oneness, and to see all things as one. So that is the nature of Tawheed. So it's Tawheed Wujudi. And this, my friends, is ultimately the message of the prophets. This is all they wanted to do, is they wanted to get man out of a animalistic, barbaric state into a state which God intended, which is the human form. If a person strives for the hikmah, the wisdom, the meaning, they make that the criteria, then they'll find wisdom in all things, not just the Quran, not just your own text. And if you make wisdom the criteria for truth, then you can look at the Bible, you can look at the Torah, you can look at other religious traditions, you can look at anything in the world. 90% of what you're doing, all this technology that's happening in the Middle East, the buildings, the bulldozers, the transmission of sciences, the ulum, everything that's happening is from the aql. It's not from Quran and Hadith. So don't fool yourselves into thinking that this Quran and Hadith is all that I need without the aql. Qawm Lut and Ad and Thamud. What relevance does that have for today? Travel in your mind. Travel through different schools of thought, different philosophies, different time periods, different thinkers. So similarly, to travel through the Bible, see the different wisdom, especially the Bible. I mean, I strongly suggest that Muslims should read the Bible. This is the statement of Prophet Isa alayhi salam, the greatest messenger after the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. We're very preoccupied as Muslims in the external aspects of religion. So I want to take this opportunity to emphasize that religion is zahir and batin. Just like Allah says, huwa al-awwal wal-akhir wal-zahir wal-batin. This is why the Prophet says, التفكر ساعة خير من عبادة 70 سنة. 1 hour of contemplation. How much ground you can cover spiritually, inside, intellectually, in your qalb. This is where the heart of Islam is. This is the heart, is that the batin that cultivates your interior. He who cultivates this is jihad al-nafs. The nafs is not external, it's internal. Then when the nafs becomes rectified, then the limbs become rectified. Then your ibadat becomes rectified. Then your relationships with your neighbors and your friends and your family becomes rectified.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. نرحب بكم في سلسلة حوارات فكرية ومعرفية على قناة حيرة. So welcome to this interview, and today we are interviewing Dr. Mukhtar Ali from London, from the United Kingdom. Dr. Mukhtar is a lecturer in Islamic Studies at the Department of Religion and University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. And Dr. Mukhtar also is a fellow at School of Advanced Studies at the University of London. He received his PhD in Arabic and Persian Sufi writings from the University of California in Berkeley. Along with his expertise in Sufism, ethics, philosophy, he is a licensed practitioner of traditional Chinese medicine, having received his doctorate from Pacific College of Oriental Medicine. So his focus in medicine complements his study of mysticism as he delves into the esoteric aspects of the human body, the spiritual origins of disease and their appropriate treatment. He has several books. He produced several works, which will some of them are forthcoming. A translation and a commentary of a very well-known Sufi text, which is Dawood al-Qaisari's introduction of Fusus al-Hikam, and he has an introduction and commentary on this book also. Also another book of Abdurrahman al-Jami, which is selected texts commenting on Naqsh al-Fusus, Naqsh al-Fusus, I think, yeah. And a third book also of Sayyid Haydar al-Amuli, which one of his major books, which is the Compendium of Mysteries and Fountainhead of Light, what we say in Arabic, Jami' al-Asrar wa Manba' al-Anwar. So welcome, Doctor, and it's an honor having you with us today.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. It's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. Hopefully we can have a fruitful conversation today, inshallah.
Inshallah. So, Doctor, you have interest in the works of Sayyid Haydar al-Amuli and his theories, so we'll just try to discover some of them today throughout our talk. And our talk will be about truth, wisdom, beauties of mysticism, and irfan, between academic involvement and real embodiment. So we'll try to focus on the importance of irfan in our life. And in human beings' life, not only Muslim people lives. So we'll talk like different from different gardens. Ibn Arabi, Haydar al-Amuli, al-Ansari in Manazil al-Sa'irin, or also how to open ourselves to different manifestations of wisdom and truth, as this هذا البيت من الشعر يقول, for everything there is a sign indicating that he is one, وفي كل شيء له آية تدل على أنه واحد. So in the beginning, Dr. Mukhtar, tell us more about you, your academic and spiritual path, and why you chose this field in your studying, and what's the importance of concentrating on the field of Irfani or Sufi studies in the current time that we live in, until you ended translating such very important books. I also knew that you know at least 4 languages, Arabic, Persian, Urdu, and English, which is a great grace and ni'mah for any person to know several languages. I guess that a person may surely widen his horizons and way of thinking, in a sense that he could understand an idea from different angles, or even he can engage intellectually from different sides and understanding an idea. So in the beginning, tell us about your experience from early age, maybe also.
Sure. So again, thank you very much for inviting me. Well, as far as my personal trajectory in this field of Islamic studies, this is actually, to be honest, a very difficult question to answer, because you have to really look at, why did you end up making the decision that you did, or it can be said that Allah chose you for a certain path over another path, because there were many options available, and people have many options in life. So why do we choose one path over another path? So this goes back to some, deeper spiritual, mystical things about, one's, this as the prophetic hadith says, كُلُّ مُيَسَّرٍ لِمَا خُلِقَ لَهُ. So every person is designed, has been made, facilitated for that which he was created. So, perhaps this is why I was created, to pursue a path of scholarship and study, and to investigate into the unearth the teachings of Islam, the outward and the inward teachings, to write about those teachings, to help other people access those teachings in English, and make it available for the modern age. So I felt on some level that this was my calling. And I think that every field and every profession, whether it's medicine or it's something, whether it's a professional field or a working field, like something that uses your hands and art and artistry, every profession has value and is needed in society. This is just something that I've chosen myself that suits my temperament and my own personal, you can say, life philosophy. Yeah.
And Doctor, tell us more about the places you studied and the teachers who affected you in your life, or maybe some masters that you were searching for and you found them in a place, so tell us more about maybe your journey.
Sure. Well, I can say that my first influence was a college professor, my dissertation advisor, Professor Hamid Algar. He was the first person to really, help me and guide me in helping me decide what I wanted to do. I remember, just being an advisor at an undergraduate level, but also later on, I studied with him during my doctoral studies as well. So he was instrumental in shaping my early understanding of really life purpose. What it is to find a purpose in your life and follow that purpose. And I think that's really the most important thing a person can do in their life. That is the fundamental, single most important piece of advice I can give to young people, and even really all people of all ages, is find your purpose. If you seek your purpose, then you will live your life to the fullest, because this is why Allah has created you. He has given you many options, and just because He created you for a certain thing, it doesn't mean that you will automatically find that purpose. So finding that purpose is really the essence of what the Prophet says, "Man arafa nafsah, faqad arafa rabbah." So he who came to know himself, this self-knowledge, meaning for finding your life, finding your purpose, then he came to find Allah, find God, find his Lord through his purpose. So the purpose of the self relates directly to the knowledge of God. It relates directly to your masira, your trajectory, and all the good things that come to you and you are able to do in life. It comes through finding your purpose. So my first influence was my professor, Hamid Algar. And then I traveled to Iran, and I actually traveled to the Middle East and Syria and Egypt and these places, and I studied Arabic. But then I had another important influence. His name is Sayyid Wafiq. He was a religious scholar, Allah yarhamhu, He's passed away, but he was a great man, and he I didn't have much interaction with him, but he gave me some critical advice, some life-changing advice, and because of those initial steps, I was able to, I think, set the right foot, put my best foot forward. He said, study Arabic. First study Arabic and then go to Qom. And a lot of students, they went directly to the seminary to study religious studies, and they didn't have Arabic. And their Arabic wasn't strong, and they could never improve their Arabic while living in Iran. It's almost impossible. You're living in a country that's speaks Farsi. You may be able to get to some level of proficiency in Arabic, but you'll never have it unless you live in an Arab country. So that move was really the best move I ever made. When I studied Arabic, it opened the door to the real teacher that I was waiting for, who was in Qom. He's an Iraqi teacher. His name is Sheikh Akram al-Majid. And ever since I've studied with him, I've been with him for 20 years now. So he's been my main spiritual guide, my main teacher. You can say murshid and sheikh, and the fatherly figure, and all these different things that we attribute to our spiritual mentor. And so this is the main teacher that I found in Qom, who I've been with ever since. And nothing against or taking away from the other teachers who taught me in Qom, but sometimes you have like one teacher who takes you on. He takes you under their wing. And so this is the situation with me and my sheikh.
Yeah, you're mentioning something?
No, I was just saying, then we studied with, in Iran, we studied with Persian teachers, we studied Farsi, we studied, Rumi and Hafid, and a lot of, so it was, anyone who knows the atmosphere in the seminary in Qom and Najaf and these places, even in Azhar, any place where there's a religious seminary, there's a lot of different things going on. There's people coming from the West, from the East, from Malaysia. It's a very international crowd. It is very, it has its issues and its problems. I'm not saying that, but overall, it was a very enriching experience, and it really was a foundational experience for me. Mm-hmm. So we studied the classical, traditional curriculum in the Hausa and in Qom, logic and usul and these subjects. But I gravitated personally to the mystical sciences, the arfan and philosophy. And this is what we started studying with Sheikh Akram. So that's, in short, if anyone wants to know, that's how it all began.
So mostly it's an influence from your teacher, Sheikh Akram al-Majid, that you went into the field of ethics and irfan and Sufism and all the spiritual dimension in Islam, and then you digged more in this path?
Well, look, to be honest, I was searching for this even before I came to the Middle East. I was reading books on Sufism in my undergraduate days. While I was studying with Professor Algar and taking courses, I was reading books by William Chittick and Professor Murata, Sachiko Murata, James Morris. So people know these scholars, Professor Sayyid Hussein Nasser. These are great scholars in Western academia who have done incredible things to promote the teachings of Islam and this, Ibn Arabi or Sufism in general. And so I was heavily influenced by that. This is before I studied Arabic, before I was going into the texts themselves. One of my favorite books of all time is this one it's called The Tao of Islam. If anyone has a chance to look over this book, it's filled with gems, treasures, from the whole tradition of Sufism, not just Ibn Arabi or any one particular thinker, but all of the great, amazing scholars, and so well translated. So this was a major influence for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think it's a book of Sachiko Murata.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, truly amazing work. It's encyclopedic, and that's a huge influence on me. And then from that I was already looking for a teacher. I mean, years before I found, my teacher, I was deeply, that's the only reason why I went to Iran. Because I was like, I know there's shuyukh there, and I'm going to find one, inshallah. So that's my whole goal, because I knew the importance of a teacher. You want to study anything, you have to have a teacher. I mean, this is common sense. If you want to study medicine, you have to have a curriculum. You have to have mentorship, and this is a difference between two types of learning. Most people, they go to the university and they take classes, but everyone knows that this is just an undergraduate. This is the first level of education, is you take general classes, even specialist classes. If you want to become an expert in anything, whether it's calligraphy or music or medicine, you have to have mentorship. You have to train with someone. And the highest levels of any field, it always comes through this type of inheritance, this type of transmission of knowledge from the master to the student. This is something which is really rooted actually in our own tradition in Islam. What is the whole prophetic model? What is the concept of wilaya? It is this transmission of knowledge, transmission of authority, transmission of spiritual teachings from one, saint, nabi, wali, whatever you want to call it. It's a transmission from one to the next, and this is an essential part of the Islamic tradition. Whether it's Sunnism or Shiism, it doesn't make a difference between the madhahib. We all agree on this concept of transmission of knowledge. It's a human phenomenon. So anyway, so that's what I was looking for, and alhamdulillah, this is something that I was able to participate in.
Great, Doctor. And then we can talk more about the importance of the Sheikh and the idea of the murshid or a guider in the whole Irfani tradition.
Yes.
But you mentioned the translation in the book of Sachi Komorata, because she's working on, she translated an effort that is done in explaining Sufism and Islam in the Chinese language. So,
yeah.
But my question, because you have experience in translating such very complicated Irfani books, so, and as people of hermeneutics or people of ta'wil say that translating is inventing or creating a new text in a new kind of beauty. So, so it needs involvement. It needs a flavor of the person. So yeah, tell us more, if in a summary, about your interest in translation and the works that you've done in translation, or the topic of translation, because people feel, no, I'm just changing the language only.
Okay, translation is it's a very enjoyable task, because outwardly you are engaging with the text. You're looking at the word. You're looking at the structure. You're analyzing the text at a very rich level. You're not just reading it. It's more of an active process. You're to engage with the material. And you learn a lot from translation. You learn new words. You learn new concepts. You investigate ways of usage, because Arabic is a very rich language, and you'll find that it's, the same word needs to be translated multiple ways in different contexts. And so it makes you think about how the author is using that word. It makes you think about how the Quran is using that word, or the Hadith is using that word. For example, the word ayn. Ayn has, hundreds of meanings. And which context is being used? Ayn the eye, ayn the spring, ayn the spy, ayn, to mean shay itself. Essence, that. So there's so many ways of expressing ayn. So this is just one example, and Arabic is filled. It's a very rich and deep language. That's the first point. So it helps you to engage with the text. The second point I can say, as a metaphysical point, as an Irfani point, that in every age there's a tarjuman, there's a translator, and the Nabi, the Prophet, is a translator for his time. He is translating the ayat of Allah, tajalliyat, the manifestations of God, in a form which the people understand. Why is it that the Quran came in Arabic? Because the Prophet was an Arab. And so the Quran came in a language which corresponded with the Prophet, and vice versa. The Prophet was created, or he was sent to a people in the language that God chose, which was Arabic. So in any case, the Prophet is a tarjuman. He's a translator of the divine signs for his people.
تراجمة وحي الله. We have the saying also about awliya.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. So similarly, just like the Prophet is the divine translator, the wali is the translator for his time. And the silsila and the chain of wilaya continues. So for every time, for every era and every age, there must be a translator of the divine signs. And this goes back to the concept of the sheikh or the murshid. The sheikh is one. What is the purpose of the sheikh? The sheikh is, for one, a coach, a guide, a teacher, a mentor. But ultimately, all of these qualities combine in the concept of the translator. The sheikh is translating the ayat, the divine signs. This is what makes him a sheikh ilahi. The difference between an ordinary sheikh and a sheikh rabbani. This is the word Imam Ali used, right?
العالم الرباني.
Alimun rabbani. What is this alimun rabbani? Why does he attribute rabbani, Rabb, to the alim, not just alim, adi, normal scholar? He says no, alimun rabbani. He's a divine scholar. He's a divinely inspired scholar. This is the sheikh. He's the one who Allah is communicating with. He's speaking to God on some level. He's reading the signs. He understands the language of the unseen. He speaks the language of the ghaib. He understands that, and then he translates that for the disciple, for the murid. And he's saying, okay, do this now, do this now. This is what you should do in order to progress and to understand God.
So translation has such a deep spiritual meaning, huh?
Yeah.
And we can talk more about the miracle of the Prophet and the Quran al-Karim and how it is a translation of the great haqa'iq later. Dr. Olson, your CV, something very interesting I didn't know about you before, which is your interest in traditional Chinese medicine and the spiritual medicine and studying the human body and the spiritual origins of the diseases and the treatment. So we won't talk about this because this is a whole story itself. So just give us a summary about your interest.
So medicine is, if you remember that the prophets, they themselves were healers. Medicine is a healing for the human body. And the sheikh is considered to be a tabib ruhani. He's a physician of the spirit. So this is one of the terms that we use to describe a sheikh, because he heals the sick souls. Every person who comes to the path, every human being has disease, has illness, physical as well as spiritual. Those diseases, they don't manifest all the time until maybe later on in life, until the body starts to break down. And similarly, the diseases of the soul also are there inside the human being. You acquire things from the environment, from your parents, from your culture, from television, from you're inundated with different things which are the origins of disease. And you yourself are one of the origins of your disease, as Imam Ali says, right? دواؤك فيك ولا تبصر وداؤك في I don't remember the exact poem. وداؤك فيك ولا تشعر, something like that. Okay, this is a famous poem of Imam Ali. And so he's saying that your cure is within you, but you don't see it. Your illness is within you, but you don't feel it.
I recall other sayings, أعدى عدوك نفسك التي بين جنبيك or صنم نفسك أم الأصنام, but this is, you're talking about a da also.
Yeah, da and dawa. He refers to these two things, da and dawa. They're both inside of you. You don't see it and you don't feel it. So this is a famous thing. You can look it up online. Now, that being said, illness and cure is a part of human existence. Just as there are physical illnesses, there are spiritual illnesses. So there is a correspondence between the physical and the spiritual. And one form of medicine is Chinese medicine. And this Chinese medicine is just a type of medicine which also looks at the correspondence between the inward, the batin, and the zahir. If you look at the actual text of Chinese medicine, they say that all the illnesses begin in the heart, in the qalb. It's a very spiritual medicine. It is rooted in a spiritual practice. And it speaks about, the energies of the human being, intentions, and all of these things we can find correspondences and corroborations in our own literature, in Quran and Hadith. But that requires a separate study. We have to see, what are the overlaps, where are the parallels between these two different types of medicine. So that's another subject. But in general, to summarize the idea of medicine and why it is important, this type of medicine, traditional medicine, always looked and considered the soul and the spiritual dimension of man in the process of healing and cure. It was never devoid of the spiritual side of the human being. The biggest illness now and today that's in the world is depression. Depression is one of the greatest problems that humanity is facing now. And modern medicine considers it to be a physical problem, but it is a spiritual problem. It's 90% spiritual and 10% physical.
Human being is not a robot. It's not a mechanical thing that you can deal with only.
Yeah, exactly. The mind is a powerful force that is, say, housed in the body. It controls the body. It is affected by the body. And yet at the same time, it is independent of the body. So to understand the mind-body connection, this is essential both in Islamic spirituality as well as medicine. And this is one thing that is lost in our own understanding of the deen of Islam. We don't consider the physical dimension and physical well-being and the ayat that Allah has placed in the physical realm, and how that affects our spiritual well-being. This is lost in our tradition.
Great. Yeah, a person should take care of his body and all the aspects that are related to his body, because even in his spiritual ascendance, the bodily issues, they have a great role.
Exactly. Yes.
Doctor, the sentence you are referring to is داؤك فيك وما تبصر ودواؤك منك وما تشعر. Then he says أتزعم أنك جرم صغير هو العالم الأكبر.
That's right. Yes. Thank you very much. Perfect. Yeah.
We have also a saying from the Prophet, or a saying that describes the Prophet. I think maybe from Imam Ali, when he says طبيب دوار بطبه قد أحكم مراهمه.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. So the prophets and the saints they were physicians, both of the physical realm as well as, but ultimately they were physicians of the soul, of the qalb.
And we normally say like والصلاة والسلام على طبيب نفوسنا وحبيب قلوبنا محمد. We say طبيب.
That's right, exactly. This is part of our tradition.
No but question. Also people would say that, for example, when prophets or even Imam Ali, when he was sick, when he was in his the Firash al-Maut, he ordered the best doctor to come and check on him. So that people say that medicine and other type of knowledge is not from the Islam or religion, because يعني هناك تخصصات وهناك علوم أخرى هي خارج الإسلام. الإسلام يعتني بالهداية أو يعني some people would argue like this also.
Let me say, if I can say something on that. The idea that Islam is limited to Sharia or only Hidayah, only spirit, is, in my view, fundamentally wrong. Islam concerns haqiqah. Islam is looking at reality. Islam is trying to guide people through wujud, through existence. Not just the prayer mat and the mosque. This is just one manifestation of Islam. A deen is the word deen itself in Arabic, is behavior. Right? As the hadith says, you are dealt with kama tudin tudan. So this deen means movement. It means tariq. It means way. It means behavior. It means mukafat, like you do something, do unto others as others will do unto you. So it has multiple applications, but ultimately, an intelligent person, is not just looking at spiritual life independently of existence. Spiritual life encompasses work, encompasses family, encompasses inheritance, encompasses neighbors and nation and politics. Everything is encompassed in deen. It's haqiqah, reality. So a person cannot divorce hidayah from reality. It's one and the same. Allah is controlling the universe. His asma are within all things. And this is how, if we look at deen in this, then we start to investigate all things, and we see that and this is the way the ulama in the past they were. The scholars of the past were investigating metaphysics and astronomy and medicine and architecture and mathematics and alchemy and all sorts of fields. And they were Muslim scholars or Islamic scholars. They were at the same time theologians as well as mathematicians, as well as physicians. So they did not divorce religion from the pursuit of knowledge of the world. It was one and the same. Knowledge is a single thing.
We have great masters, great examples. For example, Sheikh al-Bahai, he was an engineer, he was working on art and music, and he was a great mystic, he was a poet, he was a politician, and he, as well as al-Mufti and al-Qadi and the other ulum also. So this is a great introduction to start with, talking about your idea. There is an idea that you insist on, which is Irfan cares mainly about knowing haqiqah, not only about studying this alim or this book or that theory. So it's a bridge that should help us to know our path towards haqiqah. And also you say that Irfan looks at the meaning, so we should seek meaning in the beginning and not other things.
Right. Because Irfan is considered to be a hidden, mysterious science, it is considered to be maybe like an occult discipline. Many people misunderstand it. Irfan is simply ma'rifatullah. And that ma'rifatullah means knowledge of God, gnosis of God, understanding God. And as the Prophet mentioned, that knowledge comes from knowing the self. So Irfan essentially is knowing the self, knowing yourself and your place in existence and your relation to God. So all of these things are stacked one on top of the other. But it begins with knowledge of the self. Man arafa nafsah. This is the ultimate statement of Irfan. Irfan begins with this statement. It begins and it ends with the statement. Man arafa nafsah faqad arafa rabbah. So this is the beginning of Irfan. So Irfan is not, or Sufism as they say in Western academia, Tasawwuf, and Irfan in sort of like the Shi'i tradition and Tasawwuf and the other, academic traditions. Whatever you want to call it, it's not only reading Ibn Arabi. It's not reading Rumi. It's not reading, the different Urafa, Qushayri, and so on and so forth. These are textbooks that are guides that help you to understand the mystical worldview. They contain ma'arif, types of knowledge, secrets, illuminative knowledge. They contain wisdom. They contain truths, deep truth, universal truths. So they must be studied. But Irfan is not exclusive to the study of those texts. You can memorize Ibn Arabi, you can memorize the poems of Hafiz and Rumi. You can memorize the Quran and Hadith. But until a person doesn't reflect or doesn't know themselves, they know nothing. As Imam Sadiq said, Jahilun bi nafsi, jahilun bi kulli shay. This is a powerful statement. So the converse of man arafa nafsa is this statement. Jahilun bi nafsi, jahilun bi kulli shay. So he who is ignorant of himself is ignorant of all things, meaning that he may be a scientist, or she may be a physicist, a mathematician, or a great arif, or not arif, I'm sorry, like a faqih, a scholar, a marja. But if you don't know yourself, if you don't understand the nature of the soul. What are you? What is the things that motivate you? What is your path to God? What is the key of your existence? What is the key of your existence? This is the question we all have to ask ourselves. Is there a miftah? Just like we have, everything has a miftah, everything has a key. Quran has a key. What is the key of the Quran? Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It's the key, miftah al-Quran. And miftah al-Mafatih, it's the key of all keys, is this statement, Bismillah. But this is a general term. Things have keys. The house has a key. The car has a key. People's hearts have keys. If you want to get the key to someone's heart, there's a way to get to someone. Right? This is what advertisers are thinking about all the time. What is the key to selling this product? What do people want to see? What do people want to feel when they see an advertisement? So they're looking for the key. So Allah has keys, and that's why He says Mafatih al-Ghaib. He refers to the unseen, and He says Mafatih al-Ghaib, the keys to the unseen. So don't you think you have a key? What is the key to, what's the miftah of my existence? What is the key to your existence? So until we find that key or those keys, we will never know ourselves. Our soul will be locked up. So Irfan is the study to try to find that key or those keys. At least there should be one key that opens all the other locks. For sure there's one key.
Great.
And that is the most important knowledge you can have in your life, without a doubt, is the key to your own existence. If you don't have that key, it's like you're living on the surface. You're living a superficial life. You haven't really opened your soul. You haven't excavated the depth of your being. Didn't God say in the Quran, وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا? Not just Adam alayhi salam, Adam meaning insan. Mankind, well, all of insan has been given the asma, all of the divine names has been given so much potential. But we need to unlock that key, unlock those locks with the right key. And this is what the Shaykh is doing. He's trying to help you to find that key. He's trying for you to discover that key. The Shaykh will never open you directly. You have to do it yourself, but he will teach you how to do it. And so this is the Shaykh, a real Shaykh, a true Shaykh will teach you how to open the locks. He will not open them for you, because a Hakim doesn't do that kind of thing. A real Shaykh is a Hakim, a sage, a wise person. The Hakim will teach you how to do something rather than do it for you. Because if he does it for you, then you haven't arrived at your insaniya, your humanity. Your humanity is to actualize yourself. This is where the human being is a human being. Not because someone does it for him. If he can do it himself or she can do it herself, then you can say, wow, this is a human being. Wow, mashallah, you have done it yourself.
Doctor, in this context, I think an important question that we can ask, going back to the academic studies, that there is a trend in academia which deals with Arifan, like historians, as you mentioned, like Ibn Arabi said, Rumi said, Mullah Sadra said, another Arif disagreed, and these all stuff. So how do you analyze the kind of elite academic societies in the West, which now there is the growing environment of studying Sufism and Arifan and such stuff? Firstly, does it reflect a great thirst to spirituality? And secondly, is it open to ordinary people and all different kinds of people, or it's elite only? And maybe this critique can be applied to Qom and other traditional schools and institutes in the Islamic world also.
In any type of learning, there's always the danger of theory over practice. The practice is the more difficult aspect of any pursuit, to practice. So theory is relatively easy to acquire, and this is why this is usually the first place where people read books and they study. Whereas practice becomes more difficult. It requires really struggling with the nafs. Jihad and nafs, this is what it is. Jihad and nafs. Jihad. That's why, the Prophet called it jihad al-akbar. The greater jihad was a struggle against the self. Nothing else. But your jihad al-nafs could also be, talab al-ilm, seeking knowledge could be, jihad al-akbar for some people. Because they don't have an inclination to studying and learning and whatnot. So in academia, oftentimes people will pursue, and the scale of knowledge will overweigh the practice. Now, to be fair, most people I've met who are truly studying tasawwuf or irfan in academia, I found them to be also practitioners. And they have a practice. They may not overtly state it or publicize it, but they do have a practice, and I found that to be mostly the case. There are instances where you find people who just write about the material without any practice. And remember, practice informs your theory. So if you don't have a practice, then it becomes apparent in your speech and your writings that this person is shallow. It doesn't have depth, doesn't have a subtlety, doesn't know the matter, the material. They're just writing, copy pasting what this scholar said and that scholar said. But that's there as well. But oftentimes, if you look at some quality writing, you'll find that those people who have they have a practice, and you will see there's a nafas. A nafas means there's like a spirit, a ruhiyya in their writings. And this is one of the ways.
The breath of Rahman.
Yeah, exactly. Or they say the dhawq. Dhawq is a key word that's used in mystical sciences. Dhawq is like a taste, a flavor.
You can't be an outsider while dealing with such knowledge and stuff.
Well, there's levels. Again, there's levels. There's levels of how close you come to ma'arif, and what is the quality of the ma'arif, the different types of knowledge. What are the different kinds of knowledge? Like, for example, there's ilm al-firasa, ilm al-manam, there's ta'wil al-Quran, there's so many different branches of learning within tasawwuf, but ultimately those are ulum, those are secondary sciences. Ultimately a person wishes to rectify. Let me be clear. The purpose of irfan isn't to acquire power or knowledge for its own sake. It is to rectify your morality. This is the ultimate goal of Islam and irfan, right? What is it? إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ. I was sent, the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, I was only sent, right? Innama, only sent to complete the makaram al-akhlaq, the highest level of morality. Not just any akhlaq, not fadail, makaram. Makaram is like a special type of akhlaq. It is the highest level of akhlaq, and akhlaq means ethics, morality.
So, Doctor, you talked about discovering yourself, actualizing yourself, finding wisdom. And here I'll ask a question. So what kind of pluralism can be found in irfan? So I think you have an interesting idea to say here about the importance of looking for wisdom and opening yourself to the manifestations of wujud, God and truth that are all around us, and not limit ourselves to some ideological understandings or prejudice perspectives about religion and reality. Maybe many of religious people, or some, are raised in a way that they are afraid to live and travel and gain knowledge and wisdom in all different kinds and of chances and opportunities that are available in our lives. So we stay narrow or limited. So what kind of pluralism can be found in irfan, and respecting the path of other people who are trying to search to God, all from different places? And we have this wisdom that the paths to God are as many أطرق إلى الله بعدد أنفاس الخلائق, as many as human breaths.
I mean, Islam and religion is one of the manifestations of God. It is not the only manifestation. Allah came with different, hundreds of thousands of messengers, each manifested the divinity in their own time and place. Now, our belief as Muslims is that, yes, Prophet Muhammad brought the last message, but it doesn't, just because Islam is a phenomenon, it is what we consider to be the complete religious deen or the way to God. It doesn't mean that God is limited to Islam. Islam is a barnamij, it's a program. God is greater than that. God is there for the believers and the unbelievers. He is nourishing them. The asma are unbeliever in the sense that even if a person has nothing to do with deen or Islam, they can have a relationship with God. And maybe Allah created them for a specific thing that you and I don't realize. So when we as Muslims think that Islam is the only way, this is fundamentally problematic because we're limiting God's authority in wujud. Wujud is existence. So the creatures, they come to God through their own means. And so this is one principle or one idea, okay, that it is common sense that the creatures have a way to God and that God has a way to them that defies your understanding and my understanding. If we think the only way to God is Islam and Deen and Salah and Siyam, then we are limiting God's ability to communicate with his creatures. We are putting limitations on God. He can do whatever he wants. He can make Islam wajib for you but not someone else. It says it's haram for you to drink alcohol, but I didn't make this condition for someone else. Only you. So why are you judging this person? You're judging them by the Sharia that is governing you. Maybe they have another code in wujud. Existence has another path for them. That's one principle. The second principle, which is, I think, more subtle and more important, is that if you look at the nature of the divine being, we find that Allah defines himself as asma. And what are those asma? Those asma represent ideals. They represent principles, which we call mabadi and usul. So God is a set of principles. This is the nature of God. This is how he describes himself. He's al-Hakim, so he values wisdom. He's al-Alim, so he values knowledge. He's Ra'uf ar-Rahim, he's merciful. So he values these things. He's the just. He's the just. And so if God is justice, anyone who has justice, God will look at them. God will appreciate them. Because God himself is justice. He says, you have my quality. You and I, we share this quality. So God, the first person God will look at is the one who shares his quality. If you have mabadi, if you have usul, no matter what your religion is, you are the first person that God will look at. Because God defines himself as mabadi and usul. Anyone who has principles, anyone who has justice, anyone who has mercy, anyone who has these qualities that God himself defined himself as, he's close to God. Because he has divine attributes. So if you look at deen as and knowing gnosis of God and understand that whoever has the principles that God has is close to God. Whoever has justice is close to God in the aspect of justice. Whoever has mercy is close to God in the aspect of mercy. Ultimately, we find تخلقوا بأخلاق الله. تخلقوا. Takhalluq means to adopt. Khuluq, take in your own disposition, in your own akhlaq. تخلقوا بأخلاق الله. God has akhlaq, God has, and His akhlaq is His asma. What is the divine character? The asma, the divine names, the just, the merciful, the loving. So when a person adorns these qualities, then then they have actualized the deen in the real sense. Then they've actualized Islam.
Great. Doctor, but here some may argue that Islam is the final religion, it's the nasikh, it's the khatim, it's the al-ahda, and Sharia is a main part of Islam, and God wanted people to obey Him or follow Him or worship Him through the details of Sharia. Even in the Irfani doctrine, they emphasize on the role of Sharia in order to reach to tariqah and haqiqah. So how come, and we should guide others to this path, so how come they can also reach to the very high levels of spirituality even if they didn't follow? Or this will do to the great mercy of God and the great just of God, that they should find their other paths also?
Look, I mean, this goes back to the first point, and that is that God created the human being from different trees in wujud, shajara. So every person has a tree that they belong to. This wujud, this existence is God's garden, and in this garden there are different kinds of trees. And so maybe you're from a particular tree. You're from the tree of the Muhammadan tree. This is your shajara. You have intisab. You're affiliated to this tree. You go back to this. This is your roots. This is your family. That's fine. So this applies to you. But why are you limiting existence? Why are you limiting God's garden? Why isn't it? Can't you not entertain the idea that maybe God has not given other people the hidayah, the knowledge, or of this particular path, or they are not from this tree. Their kamal, their perfection is not in this. It is possible to envision, to imagine that God made their perfection in something else. It was never to, like for example, you find, I mean, there's people that God creates of all kinds of walks of life. Some people, they die as children. They die as adolescents. Some people are born with a disability. Some people are born with abilities. Some people are born, who is the son or daughter of a nabi or a prophet or an imam. Somebody is, and
a very
can be
high
guided.
IQ, for example, or
Yeah, there is no limit to God's creativity. What we are doing is we are trying to limit God by this idea of deen, of sharia, of the Arabic language. You don't think God speaks other languages? He only speaks Arabic? Okay, the Quran came in Arabic, and we value the Arabic language. It's the chosen language. We accept that. But he only understands Arabic, or he understands Swahili and French and German and the European languages and Hindi and Tamil and these languages. But we have a superiority complex. So Arabic is the chosen culture. It is the chosen language. The Prophet was an Arab. It's just it's contextual. It happened to be that way. You happen to be maybe related to the Prophet as a Sayyid. It happened to be that way. God chose this. But a person who looks at existence with an objective view and looks with tajarrud, looks with a vast perspective on life, will find that these ideas of nationhood, of madhab, of tashayyu' and tasannun, all of these things are limiting. And they are very problematic when you look at it from because the hakim, the wise person, looks beyond all of this.
So these are all very narrow ideologies and very limited types of thinking.
It's limiting. Yes, it is limiting. It has its function, but it's limiting.
Can we say that it's a type of identity egoism, for example?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's something beneficial in it, and there's something harmful in it. A person should feel proud of their culture, feel proud of their language, of their people, of what have you, their dress, these things are fine and they're acceptable, but what I'm saying is that don't limit yourself to them. So it goes into this idea of jam wa tafriqa. So you are in it, and at the same time, from the same perspective, you are detached from it. You accept it, you love your culture, you love your people, but at the same time, you find that you love also humanity. You love your neighbor. You love what is similar to you and what is different from you as well, but from another perspective. You love it because they are creatures of God. They're like Imam Ali says, either he's your brother in faith or he's your brother in humanity. So at least you share humanity with him. You share maybe other qualities with this person, other interests. You may not share the deen, but you may share other qualities with him.
I think this verse also would help here, like لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا ما أتاها. So different people are with different abilities, capacities, and different things were given to them. So each person can find his path within the things that were given to him, within the context that he lives in.
Yeah, exactly. They are, so it allows for a more liberal perspective on the nature of existence and God's mercy to His creation. And I think that
the mystery of ikhtilaf, mystery of the diversity, maybe.
Yeah, the mystery of diversity. There is a great benefit in it, and this is why God created it. This is why God created nations and people and languages and different.
وما يزالون مختلفين ولذلك خلقهم. Some say that this one of the goals of creating the existence is the اختلاف.
It is the nature of existence. It is the nature. It has to be this way. Ikhtilaf is the hikmah ilahiyya. It's part of divine wisdom. Isn't the nature of water and fire contrary? There has to be water and there has to be fire for there to be life. And these two contrary properties, they are at opposing poles of one another. And yet they gather in the same body. Insan has water and fire.
Shahwa and ghadab.
Yeah, exactly. Shahwa and ghadab, or even in the physiological level. We're water, but at the same time, we have a nervous system, we have electrical currents and impulses in the nervous system. So insan is both water and fire, all the elements. And this is what makes insan unique, is because God brought together all the elements. Contrary properties within man. This is what makes insan. Your insaniya is in contrariness. So from one perspective, you have to embrace ikhtilaf. Ikhtilaf means variety and difference. Because it is the nature of your being to be contrary. The ruh and the jism are completely opposites. One is immaterial and one is material. Totally material and one is totally immaterial. So there you have the first ikhtilaf. The fundamental ikhtilaf, or the difference in the human being, which is between the spirit and the body. So similarly, human beings have an aspect of similarity and an aspect of difference. And if you don't embrace difference, it means you haven't actualized your humanity. And you will find that when you cannot only be around people who are similar to you, you have to be around people who are different from you. This is how you learn, this is how you grow. Sometimes, Allah will force you to be, in fact, many times He will force you to be with people who you clash with. Because, like if you want to form fire, like in the olden days, they used to, hit stones together. So with clashing, you have sparks of light. Light comes through conflict. through conflict, through ikhtilaf. Without conflict, there would be no purpose of creation. There would be no humanity. There would be no test for Adam. The very first test was the ikhtilaf between the jinn and insan. That was the first test in wujud.
And here where also Arafat says like each names of God تخلقوا بأخلاق الله. So even اسم الله القاهر or al-Jabbar or al-Mudil, or they even see wisdom in the Satan, in the Shaitan, or for example they see that he's the manifestation of اسم الله al-Mudil. So even in this stuff they can see wisdom.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the ikhtilaf goes back to the asma. Fundamentally, the conflict goes back ultimately to the divine names, because there is a conflict within the divine names. And so if you look at, for example, some of the writings of Ibn Arabi and Qaysari, and he's explaining what is the reason for nubuwa. So the Nabi represents on the metaphysical plane not just hidayah for man, in the outward sense, but it actually represents the principle of justice between the divine names. So all of the divine names are kept in order through Ismullah, the divine name, the just. So the Nabi is the principle of justice. And this is the fundamental principle which keeps everything in order. The whole universe in order is justice.
Especially the Prophet Muhammad, when they say he is a full manifestation of all God's names and qualities, على حد الاعتدال والتوازن, because so in every incident the very precise and correct name manifests in the life of the Prophet. For example, al-Rahma or al-Ghadab or al-Jalal or al-Jamal. Yeah,
exactly. So the origin of conflict is within the divine names. This is the way God created the universe. He created the universe in conflict. And this conflict is itself not necessarily to be taken in a negative sense. It's just the nature of things, the nature of wujud. It's the way it is. This is the nature of creation. And so we can look at conflict and variety or differences on every level of existence, whether within ourselves, in socially, politically, in all these different arenas of life, so that like I said, conflict, it helps you to reveal your true character. If you want to be, say for example, you're like a fighter, a martial artist, a boxer. If you don't want to get hit, you go to the ring and you're afraid of getting hit, this is the wrong sport for you. This is not for you. Because you will never become a good fighter until you learn to take a punch. You get hit in the face and you understand how to deal with that. You have to get hit. Because when you actually get hit in a real situation, then you'll keep your balance. Because learning to take a hit is itself a skill, developed skill. In the beginning, you're very afraid and you don't want to get hit and you have this reflex. But you overcome that, and then you enjoy it, or you like that type of confrontation, so that it develops you as a fighter. And this fighting skill, the martial skill, this whole thing is a part and parcel of the human experience. Without jihad and nafs, without having a fighting spirit, you can never move forward in life. Not spiritually and not materially. In order to get what you want in life, you have to struggle. You have to fight for it. You have to fight your own self on many occasions, from your own laziness, from your own insecurities, from fears. These are the biggest obstacles. So you're fighting yourself. So you need to learn to fight and have there's a conflict that's going on. Every human being has conflict. From the day they're born until the day they die, there's conflict. There's a conflict on the day they're born. The child is crying when it comes out of the womb. It's not happy. It was happy in the womb. It was comfortable. Now it's into the world. The mother's in pain and the child is crying. That's all conflict. The whole scene is conflict. The child comes into this world in conflict, and it dies in conflict. How? Because he doesn't want to leave this world, but the angel comes and he snatches the soul. So there's this conflict between staying in this world and wanting to and leaving. So tell me, at which place in your trajectory, from the birth to death, there's no conflict. There's no struggle. It's the nature of wujud.
Subhanallah. And here I recalled what Sayyid Haydar al-Amuli says in this book, and this is the book that you translated, Jami' al-Asrar wa Manba' al-Anwar. He talks about al-Tawheed al-Dhati versus al-Tawheed al-Zahiri or al-Shakli or what we were born with. So maybe this idea also will help that al-Tawheed al-Dhati is available there in all human beings' life. It's there in the fitrah. They just have to realize it. And it's not necessarily to have the Zahiri Tawheed to reach to that one. Maybe you can explain here.
Basically, the idea that the Urafa, including Haydar Amuli, is proposing or purporting is that Tawheed is not a verbal claim. It is not something you just say La ilaha illallah and you are you become a muwahhid, a monotheist. Tawheed is a principle of existence. It is to understand the nature of existence in wujud, to see that God is one and that oneness is in all levels of being. The imprint, the dhat, ilahi, the dhat of God, the essence of God is God's signature. He signs everything that he does with this signature. And what is that? Tawheed, oneness. So everything has a oneness. Everything has a unifying principle, including the human being. So Tawheed is actually a process. It is not a state, one single state, but it is a process of arriving at a unification. It is arriving at the knowledge and the gnosis of the oneness of being, the oneness of God's existence. To move from a state of multiplicity into a state of unity and oneness, and to see all things as one. So that is the nature of Tawheed. So it's Tawheed wujudi. That's the meaning of what Amuli is talking about, Tawheed wujudi. And for example, like, what is, okay, let's take a practical example. Now, we said that the body has, the human being has a jism, body, has a nafs, has a khayal. Nafs is a soul, khayal is imagination, he has aql, intellect, qalb, and within the qalb there's certain dimensions called the sir and the akhfa, and then of course the ruh. Okay, so I just mentioned like 7 or 8 things there. Each of these things, these parts, they're not really parts. There's only one thing. There's only one ruh, one thing. Human insan is one. Okay, the insan is one, and it begins with Allah saying, "Alastu bi rabbikum qalu bala." God says, "Am I not your Lord?" And all the arwah, they said, "Yes, obviously, of course, you are the Lord. You are our Lord." Qalu bala. So this is the origin of insan. Badra, the seed. The seed descends into this world, into the different realms, the world, awalim. Okay, from one stage to the next stage to the next stage, up until it comes to this bodily dimension. Now, this is where the journey begins. So this is the first journey, the journey from Allah into the womb, into this bodily form of the human being, the human bodily form. Now the journey begins back to God. So man's trajectory is from the womb, from birth, until ila rabbika al-muntaha. And to your Lord is your end, your aim, your ultimately ila rabbika al-ruj'a. Your return is to your Lord. So all things are returning back to God. And now, physically, this is obvious. We are going from, youth to adolescence to maturity to old age and death. This trajectory is known. But inwardly, this is where human beings mostly falter, because they don't come to the realization that insan has an inward movement, that he must travel, he must move from a state of animal, haywaniya, to insaniya. He must move inwardly and acquire this a spiritual nature. And this, my friends, is ultimately the message of the prophets. This is all they wanted to do, is they wanted to get man out of a animalistic, barbaric state into a state which God intended, which is the human form. Suratuhu suratul hayawan. Suratuhu suratul insan wa qalbuhu qalbu hayawan, as Imam Ali says. So he's explaining man. Suratul insan. He looks like a human, but qalbuhu qalbu hayawan, meaning that his reality is still animalistic. Up until he starts to change and he transforms himself, and then he becomes insan. So this insan is, it has its own discussion of what that means. What is insaniya? As we said earlier, it is to adorn the divine qualities and to become,
Great.
reflection of, yeah.
Great.
This is Tawheed.
Great, this is Tawheed. And you also mentioned about wisdom and opening ourselves to different manifestations of God, and widening our horizons in the path towards this real transformation, is to be open to different sacred texts. So for example, you say, why not reading the Bible? Why not reading the also other sacred texts? I recall that Allama Tabatabai also, he was teaching his students, some of the special students, the text of the Upanishad, which is a Hindu text, and he was stating that I can find some of the verses which are very similar to Surah Al-Tawheed. So I think this is something that also you'd like to say something about.
Sure. This is a very good point you've raised, and really such an essential point. I think it really highlights the whole discussion for today. I think that one of the major stumbling blocks for people, particularly religious people, is our adherence to the text more than the content of the text. We believe in the sacredness of the Quran or the Hadith or a particular text more than the sacredness of the words. Let me clarify. Ultimately, a person needs to strive for meaning, for content. And if a person strives for the hikmah, the wisdom, the meaning, they make that the criteria, then they'll find wisdom in all things, not just the Quran, not just your own text. Because this is accepted. We already accept that the Quran is our sacred book. But even if we accept that on an ideological on the ideological plane, there's something missing, and that is to acknowledge that the real criteria and the value of the Quran is not that we believe that it is a sacred text or that it is from God, but the actual message that it contains, the actual wisdom that it contains. So we make the wisdom the criteria. And if you make wisdom the criteria for truth, then you can look at the Bible, you can look at the Torah, you can look at other religious traditions, you can look at anything in the world. As the Hadith says, المؤمن إذا نظر اعتبر. اعتبار, he takes a lesson. The believer, when he looks at a thing, he takes a lesson. Anything he looks at, he can look at good, he can look at evil. When he looks at good, he takes a lesson. When he looks at evil, he takes a lesson.
But here maybe the issue of tahrif will come about other sacred texts.
Again, tahrif is fine. There's nothing that has absolute isma mutlaqa. Only Allah has isma mutlaqa. Okay? And from an ideological perspective, we say, the Quran, it doesn't have tahrif. However, anything other than that, we use the criteria of the aql, the intellect. We gauge the value and the truth of a thing through its truth value. It's how it corroborates with reality. We look at the hikmah of a thing.
Even though we can claim maybe the Bible also, or what's a percentage that is muharraf and
I mean, that's a historical question. That is an archaeological question. It's not a question for the Hakim. The
Mhm.
Hakim looks at context. He looks at content. He looks at ma'ani, meaning. Right? He says, the Prophet says, خذ الحكمة ولو بالمنافق or ولو بالكافر, something like that. There's a hadith which says, take a piece of wisdom, even from the mouth of an unbeliever. Even if okay, let me ask you this: if a liar, his character is described as being untruthful, can he speak a word of truth? He can. Can you accept it? Will you accept a word of truth from a liar? Okay, an objective person, Hakim, a wise person, can. Why? Because he can distinguish between the person and the truth. The person and what he has spoken. The words he has spoken.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, he can distinguish between the two. If you cannot distinguish between the two, then that's a separate discussion. Okay, like for example, a report. We don't know. Like say, this is a very common problem in like hadith science. Every hadith we encounter, we say, oh, da'if. هذا ضعيف. This is the sanad is weak. This transmission is weak. We especially like you look at some very famous hadith, and you reject the hadith just because of the transmission. Why don't you look at the content? Why don't you look at because the idea of the transmission itself is problematic. You're believing in the transmission, but you don't believe in the content. You don't believe in the hikmah. So the transmission, whether or not, how do we know that transmission is weak? You said it's weak. It's a claim. How do you know the transmission is a strong transmission? Sahih. This hadith is sound. How do you know it's sound? It was something that was spoken 1,400 years ago when there was no electricity, there was no recording devices, people didn't have pens and papers, people didn't even have, shoes to wear. And they're recording the hadith like night and day. And this one, and then they make a system of hadith, sahih, mursal and da'if, and all of this happened like hundreds of years after the Prophet. The hadith sciences evolved. It didn't happen in the time of the Prophet.
Let me take the counter argument. They may say that based on certain criteria that they've done, so the probability of the sahha will be more. So they're working with probabilities. Some probability would be higher when they say sahih or hasan. This all what they can do. But then you can argue that even the taqimat of people, they differ in it, and it's all a matter of probability.
Look, when it comes time for realities and haqa'iq, you don't look at probabilities. You look at haqiqah. You look at truths. Probability is something you take as a second sort of a secondary measure. The first thing you look at is that you weigh it against the aql, in the intellect. The intellect should gauge and should guide you first. As the Prophet says, al-aqlu rasul al-batin. Rasul is a rasul. The messenger of truth, rasul al-haq. You want to know truth? Are you going to rely on mursal and sanad? Or are you going to rely on aql, the rasul al-batin?
Or even they would say then حدثني قلبي. This is another criteria.
So the qalb, the aql and the aql are the same from different perspectives. Qalb is a deeper version of the aql. So the aql or the qalb, it gauges things, it weighs things, it has the power of discernment. This is the power of the intellect. If you rely on sanad alone, it means you've given no authority to the intellect to decide. You think all of this technology that we're using, these recording devices, cameras, and iPhones, which does a million things. The iPhone is a marvel of technology. You and I can't even understand what goes into one mobile device and how it communicates to the world. You can talk to anyone. It's a camera. It's a million things. One small device. This is from hadith. This is from that you made this device and you're controlling the world from this technology, from hadith and Quran, or from the aql. 90% of what you're doing, all this technology is happening in the Middle East, the buildings, the bulldozers, the transmission of sciences, the ulum, everything that's happening is from the aql. It's not from Quran and hadith. So don't fool yourselves into thinking that this Quran and hadith is all that I need without the aql. The intellect is the thing which helps you to discern the Quran and Hadith, to understand it, to apply it to today's age.
Great.
How are we going to apply the Quran, which is stories for thousands of years ago, Qawm Lut and Ad and Thamud? What relevance does that have for today? Nobody knows. You don't know, I don't know. Nobody knows what that means. Okay, we read it, Khatm al-Quran in the month of Ramadan, for barakah, but so religion is one category and aql is another category. If you ask a doctor, if you ask a scientist, you ask the people who are on the cutting edge, who are doing amazing things in this world, all of this technology, this broadcast right now is happening, in 2 different countries, 2 different continents through technology, which is like astounding. And this all came about from, the human mind. The aql al-bashari. It didn't come from Quran. It didn't come from Sunnah. It didn't come from Muslims. No Muslim invented. Sony is not some Muslim company, nor is Apple, nor is Sennheiser. These companies who make all this equipment that we are using and we're harnessing and utilizing. Nothing came from the Quran and Hadith. So let's not fool ourselves as an ummah to believe that the value. The Quran, I'm not trying to devalue the Quran and Hadith. Don't get me wrong here. It needs to be in the context of the aql. That's why Imam Ali says, قَدْ أَحْيَ عَقْلَهُ وَأَمَاتَ نَفْسَهُ. The first thing he says that he revived his intellect. He revived his intellect. أَفَلَا يَعْقِلُونَ. It says in the Quran time and time again, do not think, do not intellectualize. What is this aql the Quran is referring to, the hadith Imam Ali is referring to? What is this aql? This is the same thing, this technology, this advancement, this understanding, discernment. So similarly, we use the same aql to use and to understand the Quran and Sunnah. And the higher form of aql is hikmah. When the aql becomes complete, when it reaches a level of completion, then it derives a principle, a universal principle, and this is called hikmah. Hikam, plural. So it starts to understand wise wisdom and wise sayings. Then that hakim will start to investigate hikmah in all things. You'll find that Allah's hikmah is in all things. In creation, other books, and other philosophies, and other philosophical schools. Allah has divided. Yeah, exactly. Allah has given knowledge and wisdom throughout the different nations, and different cultures, and different languages. So it's, that's why it pays. It's important to learn different languages, to learn about other cultures, to read their literature, to understand the mentality, and to see what gifts they have that Allah has given them. Exclusively to them. So we try to expand our horizons.
الله ميز الأمم والحضارات والشعوب بميزات وإبداعات وخواص مختلفة, and a person should swim between different places.
Yeah, exactly. Travel, siru fil ard. Travel. Sidq Amr in the Quran. Travel the land. Travel and see and learn. And by travel and learning, you expand your horizons. And you see the ayat of Allah. You see the signs that God has placed in different parts of the earth with different people and different cultures. Different ayat come to you. So then you add to your personal experience. You add to your own personal development. And similarly, travel in the mind. Not just on the planet, on the earth. Travel in your mind. travel through different schools of thought, different philosophies, different time periods, different thinkers, read about different philosophical schools, different cultures and traditions. So this is travel.
Doctor,
Just because you
talking.
travel into and you read the Bible, and you turn, you go and you study the Bible, study the Torah, it doesn't take anything away from you. It adds to you. Just like if you travel to another country, you don't leave your home. You come back to your home. You travel, you enjoy, you see what that country has to offer you, and then you come back to your home. So similarly, to travel through the Bible, see the different wisdom, especially the Bible. I mean, I strongly suggest that the Muslims should read the Bible. This is the statement of Prophet Isa alayhi salam, the greatest messenger after the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him.
Great, great. And Doctor, talking about Ayatollah, and you mentioned the Prophet Muhammad and the mystery of the Quran, or the mystery of the kalima. In your article, The Power of the Spoken Words, you say, some Islamic metaphysicians argue that the word kalima refers to being itself, and that it is the nature of being to effuse every plane of existence before reaching the plane of human language. It is the sacred pedigree that manifests through human speech and intellect, and gives rise to the idea that the human being has been created in the image of God. So it's talking about the mystery, the secrets, and the importance of the Quran, which is the great miracle of the Prophet. I think also Ibn Arabi has very nice things to say here when he compares between word and creation, kun. So one of his sayings is, know the existent beings are the words of God which do not cease. So the kalima al-ilahiyya, or nafas al-Rahman, which is the breath of the all-merciful. And also Imam Ali has this saying that God has manifested himself in the book, but they don't realize it. So the mystery of the world and the kalima al-Quraniyya al-mutajalli ala qalb al-Nabi. I think you mentioned that one of the major sides that we should discover the azama of the Prophet Muhammad is through the Quran. So if you can explain a bit of this idea.
Sure. The whole idea, which is a pretty established idea, that existence is the words of God, kalimat ilahiyya, and all things God spoke, and the first word He spoke was this idea of kun. Kun means be, and of course it's a metaphor. How it happened, these are all metaphysical and spiritual asrar, and it's difficult to comprehend what does it mean that God spoke. What does it mean that He said a word kun? What does that mean exactly? Anyway, let's leave that for now. Let's just speak in metaphor right now. So God spoke, and that speech came from this nafas al-Rahmani, and this nafas al-Rahman is a term that the Prophet himself used. So it's not something that the Urafa just invented. It's a term that he himself used. This nafas, this breath, ar-Rahman, Allah breathed in a sense, and He spoke this word. And this word is be, and this whole existence is a manifestation of that word be, and or in other words, you can say that everything is a word of God. But now, since wujud, or existence, can be described as the words of God, we can say that there are actually more than one word. There is the existential book, which comprises of the words of God, the existential book, all right? So this is kitab al-afaqi or takwini. Takwin means existence. And then the second type of book is the book of the soul. Sanurihim, as the verse of the Quran says, Sanurihim ayatina fil afaqi wa fi anfusihim. We will show them our signs. And our ayat refers to the signs, to the words. Fil afaq means the horizons, or wujud, al-kawn. And fi anfusihim, and in themselves. So this is one of the verses which is often used to describe this duality between the divine words in existence and the book of the soul. And then the third type of book is considered a kitab al-tadwini, and this is the written book. And this is considered to be scripture, or the Quran in our case. So these three books of God, each one of them has a correspondence with one another. This is why Imam Ali says, "Ana Qur'anun natiq." Right? Also describing the character of the Prophet. He's the speaking Quran. And the heart.
Quran. So the whole of his existence is a Quran, for example.
Yeah, exactly. His character, the whole of his existence. He is the spoken word of God. He speaks. He's the living word of God. The Quran is
Kalimatullah also in the Quran. The
that's right, exactly. Ahsant, yeah. And so this idea of kalima describing not only wujud, existence and things, it also describes insan, because Allah describes Isa as the kalima. Thank you for bringing that up. And he says that he is a word of God. So insan is himself as a kalima. And of course, if you look at Ibn Arabi in his whole book Fusus al-Hikam, we find that it's all, al-kalima, kalima ilahiyya fi fasli, so and so. So he considers each prophet as a kalima. And this is something that's not foreign. It's used in the Quran. It's there. So anyway,
there's a mystery here, Doctor, talking about kalimat and huruf, and I think Ibn Arabi also mentions that all the existence are kalimat and huruf and jumal of God. And when we read the Quran, we find also kalimat and jumal and huruf, and we find this huruf al-muqatta'a, which is also another mystery. And I think Sayyid Haydar al-Amuli in his tafsir al-Muhit al-A'zam, or in all his books, he talks about al-mutabaqa bayna kitab al-tadween وكتاب التكوين وكتاب النفس. So like or as well, always he say like there are three levels: sharia وطريقة وحقيقة, or Islam وإيمان وإحسان. These three maratib. Or here we have the nafs and the afaq and the tadween. So a person should do the mutabaqa. And here maybe we can talk about the mystery of the personality of the Prophet, who was the full mutabaqa between these three realms.
No, I mean, you've summarized it perfectly. This is exactly what it is. It's a mutabaqa, or correspondence between the three books. And each one of them is a part of a larger whole. And this is what we mean by tawheed, is to amalgamate the character of the Quran in the self. And also the Quran, it speaks to you according to your munasaba with it, according to your correspondence with it. Now, there's a lot to be said about this. Basically, I want to get to the point that the character of the Prophet can be known through the Book of God. There's no other way to know the Prophet. We revere the Prophet, we hear stories about him, and there's two ways really: the Hadith and his statements, and really the Quran, which is the miracle which describes his character. So this is the two essential ways of knowing the Prophet, the insan, who is, in the terms of the mystics, insan al-kamil. Right? So the prophets, they were themselves the perfect human beings, the exemplary human beings. That's simply the basic idea. And if I can add to that a little bit, it will say that, look, the Quran came for the Prophet. This is the character of the Prophet. It's not necessarily, not every verse applies to you and me. Sometimes it addresses, there's things, it's an ocean, and it has mutabaqa to the qalb al-nabi. It has a correspondence to the heart of the Prophet. And we have a share in that. We don't encompass it. He encompasses it. So this is when we have to also be realistic with how we approach the Quran, how we approach the Book of God, the Book of Guidance. We're like one ray of light from the Muhammadan light. So look at your wujud and your existence as being, is to see yourself, where do you fit into the trajectory of existence? Where is going back to our very first issue that we talked about, knowing the keys to yourself, knowing what is your existence, what are you composed of? And the Quran will help you to unlock those mysteries. You will find correspondences with some verses and not others. Some verses are for you and some are not for you. They have no munasabah to you. So read the Quran as an intelligent person. Don't just go through the beginning from beginning to end and just, sing the Quran, a nice tartil, beginning to end. No, look at it from a perspective of like, this is the story of my life. This is the textbook of my life. This is the mirror of my soul. Let me see what I can find about myself through the divine book. I want to find myself in the verse. Look at it like that from time to time. I want to see what am I? Who am I? Will the Quran guide me to this? So if it's a book of guidance, then it will guide you to that. So that's why we say that the Quran is a mirror for the heart of the Prophet. It mirrors him.
And here I would add, Doctor, that one of the beautiful mysteries about the reality of the Quran or the reality of the revelation, just like they research in the philosophy of religion, or some theologians also, they say, so what's the real essence of the revelation, when it happened, how it happened, in a لحظة المعراج, it's a لحظة فكان قاب قوسين أو أدنى, so what's the reality of such revelation? And they try to think and present some ideas and theories. I don't know if Sayyid Haydar or you would like to add something. So, like it's a lahza where the Prophet reached to the highest level of fana, and then he was in a lahza of unity where he gained all these realities. في دفعة واحدة. I don't know if you can explain one of the theories about the revelation here as a summary.
I mean, look, we have this idea of jam' and tafsil, and inzal wa tanzil. So there is this idea that, yeah, on one level the Prophet received it all at once, and another level that he had to manifest it verse by verse in different parts. Now remember that the Quran is itself, this word tajalli, it is the tajalli, the theophany, God's theophany on the heart of the Prophet. These are tajalliyat, and they've been codified as divine speech. So this is a divine God speaking. Whenever God speaks, like he spoke to Musa from the bush, he spoke to different prophets. So the Quran is the divine speech. So speech is a tajalli, and there's different kinds of tajalliyat. This is a very important word that we should learn, and it really will unlock a lot of the conceptual framework that the Urafa and the mystics work with. They talk about, especially Ibn Arabi talks about tajalliyat a lot. So tajalli, again, it's a kashf. Kashf means an unveiling. Now remember, there was always a correspondence between the fitra, the qalb of the Nabi, and the receiving of the Quran. So there's a correspondence. I mean, we're going to go into too many tangents, I think, I think just the basic idea that, to summarize these concepts, the Quran corresponds to the Prophet, the heart of the Prophet. We have 3 books, Kitab Tadwini, Takwini, and Anfusi. And each one of them correspond to one another. What that means by correspondence is that you can learn from each one of them, from the other. Each one of them is a sign of God, ayat, that reflects in the mirror of the other. So by working with these 3 things, you are in unison. You are worshiping God in multiple ways. You are worshiping Him, you are seeing Him in the mirror of existence, as you are seeing Him in the mirror of your soul. And then you can corroborate those 2 with the mirror of the book. And it's necessary to see Him in all 3. This is when we really start to move spiritually.
Doctor, I think it has been a very long and interesting talk, sharing many different deep ideas and theories about Irfan and about Wilaya and about all these stuff. So if we want to make a summary of what we said today, or if you have any things more to say.
Sure. I'd just like to emphasize that everything that we've said so far about Irfan as a subject, it should not become something alien for the common Muslim to contemplate. the reason why I say this is because we are very preoccupied with the acts of worship, salah, siyam, hajj, ibadat, and the external, or even like fiqh and jurisprudence. We're very preoccupied as Muslims in the external aspects of religion. So I want to take this opportunity to emphasize that religion is zahir and batin. Just like Allah says, huwa al-awwal wal-akhir wal-zahir wal-batin. And these are considered to be the great four ummahat al-asma, the great names of God, that everything is under these four things, that He is the first, the last, the inward, and the outward. So deen has an inward as well as an outward. Insan has an inward as well as an outward. In fact, everything has an inward and an outward. And in order to truly understand life, to be wise, to reach where you want to reach, to fulfill your life, you must engage with zahir and batin. This is why the Prophet says, التفكر ساعة خير من عبادة 70 سنة. What does that mean? He says, thinking, contemplating for 1 hour is better than 70 years of worship, or maybe a year of worship, sana, or 70 sana, something like that. There was, if you look at the hadith, there's different versions. But the idea, he's saying, look at the scale of contemplation, weighing that against 1 year of worship, or a whole lifetime of worship. 1 hour of contemplation. How much ground you can cover spiritually, inside, intellectually, in your qalb, through 1 hour of contemplation. This is where the heart of Islam is. This is the heart, is that the batin that cultivates your interior. He who cultivates this is jihad al-nafs. The nafs is not external, it's internal. Then when the nafs becomes rectified, then the limbs become rectified. Then your ibadat becomes rectified. Then your relationships with your neighbors and your friends and your family becomes rectified. Until the batin isn't clean and pure, the person will never reach the station of ikhlas, or qalbun salim, or nafs tuma'nina, and all these different stages and stations we talked about. Inshallah, we'll talk about in the next session about insan and the different stages and stations that a person will go through in Sayyid and Suluk.
Great. Thank you, Doctor, for all the information and the insight you shared with us and the wisdom. And inshallah, in the second part, we'll continue talking about many beautiful things about Sayyid Haydar al-Amuli and Ibn Arabi and Manazil al-Sa'irin and Ansari and other spiritual stuff. Inshallah, we'll continue in a second part. Thank you and Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Thank you very much, everyone. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.